The skyrocketing cost of living has left millions of people working at full-time jobs or a number of part-time jobs still unable to afford a place to live.
Many people who work, who may have more than one job, but have come into circumstances where they cannot afford to keep a roof over their head.
It's really easy for terms like the housing crisis or the homelessness crisis to become kind of abstract and to lose touch with just the acute human toll of this growing catastrophe in America.
There's no place for us. Perhaps in the near future, this will be the slogan replacing the once unwavering belief in the American dream. How can you believe in prosperity when even full-time workers, those considered stable and secure, are living on such a thin thread that just one missed paycheck could send them straight into homelessness? This is no longer a story about a marginalized group or low-income individuals. This is the reality for millions of workers, office employees, drivers, nurses, teachers, people who are doing everything society asks of them, working hard, being on time, paying taxes, and trying to maintain a normal life. However, that normal is gradually disappearing, swept away by soaring house prices, stagnant wages, and an economy where stability has become a privilege for the few. Perhaps Americans today don't live to move forward, but only to avoid falling down, and they are failing every day. In today's video, we'll uncover the shocking truth behind a wealthy nation that leaves millions of full-time workers sleeping in cars, tents, or facing the risk of being evicted from the very place they call home. This is not just a warning. It is perhaps a desperate future for the American dream and an entire nation considered the most prosperous in the world. Housing and homelessness crises are often seen as two separate issues, one concerning rising rents and the other associated with images of people sleeping on sidewalks. But that boundary is gradually becoming blurred. In many American cities, losing one's home and being forced to live on the streets is no longer the fate of the lazy or those on the margins of society. It's becoming the common outcome for even those who still work hard every day, people who society once believed were immune to precarity. For decades, Americans have grown up with a simple belief: having a job means having stability. However, today's reality is making that truth unbelievably fragile. There are people who finish their shift, walk out of the grocery store or distribution center with their uniforms still smelling of grease, and then go straight to the parking lot, not to drive home, but to pull down the back seat, turning their car into the only bedroom they have to rest their heads. Those who live on the edge of a four-wheeled home describe their lives as being split in two. By day, they are process-compliant employees, wearing name tags, living like any other ordinary American. But as night falls, they become addressless people, living in fear of the police knocking on their doors, of their vehicles being towed, and of society discovering them sleeping in the very vehicles they use to get to work. This is the part that America rarely mentions. Not everyone sleeping in their car is unemployed. An increasing number of people are working full-time while also being homeless. What's astonishing is that what we see on the streets, tents under bridges, homeless people in the squares, is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath that is another world of homelessness, almost made invisible. Experts call this group the working homeless. If this was previously an exception, it has now become a trend. According to an analysis by Florida Rising, the United States is seeing 60% of the homeless still working full-time. This figure completely contradicts society's ingrained perception of homeless people. A naive question from a child asking their parents, "Where are we staying tonight?" is gradually becoming the most painful problem that not all parents can find a solution to. It's not that they're irresponsible, but that they genuinely don't know if they'll have enough money to pay for the motel room tonight or if their usual parking lot will allow overnight parking. That uncertainty, according to psychologists, creates toxic stress, a form of chronic stress that can affect children's brain structure and behavior. Behind this situation lies another economic problem. Wages are stagnant, while housing costs are rising at a rate far exceeding income. In many cities, a full-time minimum wage worker would have to work up to 86 hours per week just to afford a modest one-bedroom apartment. When the problem has become so absurd, simply doing more is no longer a solution. In a widely shared post on Reddit, a full-time retail worker says that despite working full hours, she still has to sleep in her car, shower at the gym, and eat cheap food to save every dollar. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. How did I become homeless, even though I was working full-time? That self-questioning share of hers was like an SOS signal that America seemed not to hear. The consequences of working full-time while being homeless are not limited to material deprivation. It's the slow erosion of self-esteem. Many people say they don't dare tell their colleagues, fearing they'll be seen as failures, even though they're working longer hours than anyone else. Isolation, shame, and financial pressure left them exhausted both physically and mentally. When an adult can't be sure where they'll sleep at the end of each day, the rest of life, further education, career changes, healthcare, becomes a luxury. They don't dare to think about the future. They only think about tonight, tomorrow, this week. And from those lives, a difficult truth gradually emerged. Working hard no longer guarantees security. Full-time, once a symbol of stability, is becoming an empty concept, losing its meaning and the trust of millions of Americans. Perhaps a mother of 4 living in a small motel room rented weekly for $375 is becoming a new and bitter symbol of America today. The poor are not only unprotected, but seem to be paying a higher price for every basic need, including the right to have a roof over their heads. Families who choose extended stay hotels or motels do so not because it's the ideal option, but because it's the last option they can access. No long-term contract, no good credit score required, no deposit needed. It sounds flexible, but that flexibility comes at an unbelievably high price. The cost per night is usually higher than traditional rentals, leaving most of their income going toward just one thing: keeping the room key for another week. These places are often located on the outskirts of the city, next to highways, or in old industrial areas, lacking green spaces, playgrounds, and everything that could help a family feel like they belong to a community. Life there is like extending the feeling of temporary stay indefinitely, as residents don't know when they will be asked to leave. But the problem isn't just a few isolated cases. Housing cost reports from multiple years show that to rent a modest one-bedroom apartment, a minimum wage worker would have to work over 80 hours per week, more than 2 full-time jobs. The gap between wages and rent prices forces many people to live in this expensive temporary housing model. They don't meet the requirements for formal rental applications, from credit history and minimum income to the initial deposit. And that's when the spiral began. Rent is only part of the picture. They still have to manage the costs of food, gas, insurance, and healthcare on their own. When everything increases at the same time, the income remaining for savings almost disappears. Living in a car or motel and paying by the day or week sounds flexible, but it actually puts renters in a short-term cycle of stress with no end in sight. If you pay this week, you'll have to start over next week. They couldn't plan for the future beyond a few days. They also don't have long-term leases, meaning they don't benefit from any legal protections. If they're just a week late on rent, they can be asked to leave that same day. Many people describe extended stay as a trap. Once you've brought your children, belongings, and lifestyle into it, saving enough to move into a real apartment becomes almost impossible. Everything in this model benefits the landlord and harms the tenant, leaving them in a constant state of high cost, low asset. The high cost of poverty leads to a bitter paradox. Despite working full-time, they cannot escape a week-to-week existence. They have no financial cushion to withstand an event, a minor illness, a week of lost work hours, an emergency expense. And that's precisely what makes full-time no longer the guaranteed safety net it once was. Many stories in recent reports all begin the same way. People who still go to work regularly, holding their labour contracts in hand, and receiving their salaries each period just like everyone else. They are employees of car rental companies, insurance companies, convenience stores and restaurants, positions once considered the foundation of a stable working class. However, just a small crack in the family budget and everything immediately collapses. Many journalists believe that a low-paying job today is like a straight slide into the risk of homelessness, because just a decline in health, a cut in working hours, or a sick child can completely shatter a family's already fragile financial structure. It's not because they spend wastefully, but because they don't have any surplus to withstand fluctuations. Financial surveys show that America is living in a state where over half of adults are living paycheck to paycheck. The entire salary is used for essential needs, leaving almost nothing for savings. For low-income groups, this rate is even higher. Just one unexpected expense, car repairs, an unexpected illness, a few days without pay, is enough to make them unable to afford that month's rent. The situation is made worse by the fact that the federal minimum wage has remained stagnant for over a decade. Meanwhile, rent, healthcare, food, and gas prices are all increasing. The gap between income and the cost of living is no longer unusual. It has become a trend. Workers work longer hours, but they live under greater pressure. Many people share a similar feeling. They did everything they were taught, worked hard, didn't cause trouble, tried to raise their children, but were still pushed to the brink in an unexpected way. The belief in the saying, "try and you'll be fine," seems to no longer hold true in the face of the current economic reality. When housing prices, food prices, gas prices, and healthcare costs all rise simultaneously, just 1 week of lost work hours or a single serious illness can cause that seemingly fragile stability to collapse entirely. And when you lose your home, everything else, your job, your health, your mental state, goes with it. National homeless reports show that the number of people without homes on a single night count has increased significantly compared to the previous year. This shows that these are no longer just a few sad stories, but a worrying trend across the entire United States. Looking at this picture, one begins to understand that if even full-time workers are gradually slipping down, then what we see on the streets is just the tip of the iceberg. The hidden part, larger, darker, and harder to recognize, is the world of people living in hidden homelessness, and their numbers seem to be growing faster than we can imagine. There are stories that show the cruelty of the system doesn't stem from poverty or natural disasters, but from seemingly indifferent, cold rules imposed on the people just when they are at their weakest. As in the case of the woman who discovered the house she was renting had been completely burned down. Black walls, furniture reduced to ashes. She thought it was a moment of empathy from the landlord, but the real estate company, part of an investment fund, still demanded she pay the current month's rent and an additional month to break the contract. The deposit is also non-refundable, even if the house no longer exists. Unable to pay that unreasonable amount, she could only leave silently. But the story doesn't end there. An eviction notice was placed directly in the mailbox of the burned-down house. By the time she reached the court, everything had been decided against her by default, and the official deportation record was entered into her civil record, as if she were the offender, not the victim of the fire. From that moment on, her credit score was ruined, and every subsequent rental application was denied. The landlord doesn't look at the circumstances, only at the numbers on the report. Large investment funds continue to buy entire apartment complexes and neighborhoods, then apply strict rules regarding late payments. Just 1 day late on rent, eviction papers can be filed immediately. And that record follows the tenant for many years, regardless of the reason. A family lost their home not because they didn't work, but because they were exactly one day late, and the system didn't care about any real-life circumstances behind it. In this model, tenants become easily replaceable. When a household can no longer keep up with payments, the apartment is cleared out and rented to someone else at a higher price. And your old family? They return to temporary places, motels, extended stay hotels, or the car parked in the overnight lot. Meanwhile, credit score filters, rental history, and minimum income requirements continue to operate mechanically. It doesn't distinguish between who just escaped a fire, who just went through a serious illness. Everything is placed within the same evaluation system, where personal circumstances have no bearing. Those who are still working full-time, but have been evicted or declared bankrupt once, almost have no way back into the formal rental market. For them, the only practical options left are motels, cars, or shelters. When the official doors closed, a small shock, lost work hours, a broken car, unexpected illness, was enough to send them spiraling into the deepest depths of crisis, where the story was no longer just about money, but the loss of both dignity and a sense of belonging to society. For many people, life doesn't fall apart in one grand moment. It crumbled bit by bit, a bad habit, an illness, a bill, a day of unemployment. And as that chain of events accumulated, some people found themselves in places they never thought they would be. A former soldier who worked as a naval medic recounted that after battling illness, he sold off all his assets one by one to stay afloat. Finally, he was left with only one bag of belongings and a bed in a large drainpipe underground. Every evening, he had to hold onto the railing to climb down, and every morning he struggled to climb back up. That's where he called home for months, until one rainy night, the water suddenly rose, sweeping his last bag of belongings down the stream. He said we could buy back each item, but the feeling of losing everything he had left made him feel like he was erased from his old life. Even those trying to stay in extended stay facilities are not immune to that cycle. A mother discovers she has a terminal illness, but still doesn't dare go for a checkup, fearing she'll miss her 10-hour shift. Just one day off was enough to leave her without money to pay for the room, meaning the whole family could lose their place to sleep that night. When tonight's sleeping arrangements become a question mark, every health decision, which should be an absolute priority, has to take a back seat to the single question: if I go to the doctor, where will I sleep tonight? And it was that cruel problem that caused many people to delay treatment until their condition became serious. Shame is another layer of the spiral. A person who was once cherished by their family and invested in their education shared that the most painful thing wasn't the cold, hunger, or fear, but the feeling that they had broken the hearts of those who had placed their trust in them. That very feeling makes them hesitant to reach out to family or friends, fearing they'll be seen as a burden, leading to self-isolation, narrowing down even the few remaining outlets. That isolation makes it even harder to access support. When personal documents, driver's licenses, and medical records are lost, the cycle tightens. Without documents, it's hard to get a job. Without a job, you can't rent a house. Without a house, it's even easier to lose more documents and assets. Everything is connected like an unbreakable chain reaction. And when the vortex had tightened to its fullest extent, the path back no longer depended on getting another job or a subsidy. It demands deeper change, a change in how society perceives and treats those who have fallen off the safety ladder. Because if someone can be thrown to the wayside with just a small incident, perhaps the problem isn't with them, but with the very structure we're operating within. The latest figures from nationwide homeless reports paint a picture unseen in decades. Over 650,000 people were without homes in a single night's count, an increase described by many experts as unprecedented since modern statistical systems began operating. And what's more concerning, this number only reflects what's visible. The invisible segment, those living in cars, motels, or couch surfing, could be much larger. Research organizations have warned that if house prices continue to outpace wage growth at the current rate, the number of people who have to spend a large portion of their income just to pay rent will increase. The gap between the barely surviving group and the homeless group will become so thin that a small slip could cause someone to fall. Household financial surveys show that a large percentage of consumers in the US are living paycheck to paycheck. For low-income groups, this percentage is even higher. That means millions of people are standing right on the edge of the abyss, just 1 or 2 events away from losing their homes. In that context, some localities are starting to implement the housing first model, providing the homeless with stable housing first and then considering employment, healthcare, or mental health. This approach has yielded many positive results: reduced homelessness recurrence, increased job retention rates, and lower emergency medical costs. But on a national scale, this model has not yet been implemented uniformly. It's like isolated bright spots in a vast painting with many dark areas. Meanwhile, policies that tighten tent camps, clean up temporary shelters, and erect barriers in public spaces may help create a cleaner urban image in the short term, but they are unlikely to address the root causes. When forcibly relocated, the homeless simply move to another hidden corner, further from the centre, with fewer services, and even more difficult to access support. The problem doesn't disappear, it's just pushed out of sight. Charities and small shelters continue to fill the gaps that the formal system hasn't reached, helping the homeless with paperwork, providing psychological care, and building a sense of community. But they rely on donations and individual goodwill, a resource that is inherently fragile and difficult to sustain in an increasingly strained economy. Some analysts warn that the US is shifting toward a two-tiered economy. The group that owns assets continues to benefit as home prices rise, while the group that rents, particularly low-wage workers, has to pay increasingly high prices just to maintain housing. If this gap continues to widen, it will not only create a housing crisis, but also deeply shake social trust. Perhaps the answer to America's future will depend on whether we choose to look at the invisible part of this crisis, or continue to turn away, allowing it to fester in the shadows for many more years. Looking back at the stories that span from temporary shelters, parking lots, overpasses to cramped extended stay motels, one thing becomes clear. Homelessness in America today is no longer a problem for someone else, but is getting very close to the lives of the most ordinary people. Even full-time workers who do everything they were taught since childhood can lose their homes due to a very small event. The dream of stability, once the foundation of a generation, seems to be fading. It didn't disappear overnight, but rather dissolved layer by layer, as house prices continued to rise, wages stagnated, and the support system was patched up with short-term solutions. The future, therefore, depends not only on policy, but also on how we, as individuals, choose to perceive those living on the margins who should never have been there in the first place. If a full-time job is no longer enough to keep a roof over one's head, what will the foundation of America look like in the next 10 years? And more importantly, when everything can collapse because of a small event, are any of us truly safe? If this story resonates with any part of your experience, or makes you think differently about the housing crisis, please leave a comment, and share the video with friends you believe need to see it. And if you want to delve deeper into the perspectives on America today, please subscribe to the channel. This helps this content continue to reach those who are looking for answers just like you. This video is intended to provide information and analysis based on publicly available data sources, reports, and research. The content is not intended to blame, incite, or accuse any individual, group, or organization. Each story has its own context, and all figures are presented in a neutral, conditional, and time-sensitive manner. Viewers are encouraged to verify information from multiple sources before drawing their own conclusions.